It remains the deadliest terrorist attack on European soil this century. On the 11th of March 2004, a series of 10 coordinated explosions within minutes of each other on board 4 commuter trains heading into Madrid in the morning rush hour. In all, 193 people were killed, including a special forces soldier who died as 7 suspects blew themselves up in a flat on the outskirts of Madrid a few weeks later. The initial attacks came just 4 days ahead of the country's crucial general election, the ruling centre-right People's Party jumping on a belief that the Spanish separatist group ETA, which had killed over 800 people in decades of violence, was responsible.
There is no possible nor desirable negotiation with those assassins who have sowed death many times on the Spanish territory.
But from the start, investigators said the explosives used and other evidence pointed more to a possibly al-Qaeda-inspired attack in response to Spain's involvement in the Iraq War. A few days later, the resulting outrage ousting the government in a huge swing. Investigations into who was really involved have been complex, and it wasn't until 2 years later that 29 suspects, said to be mostly from local groups of Islamist extremists, were charged with involvement. 21 of them, in the end, found guilty. No direct link, though, to al-Qaeda has ever been proved, some even continuing to believe ETA was at least partly responsible. Celine Schmidt, Armel Exposito with Sarah Morris revisit the Madrid train bombings for France 24.
Rosa Maria is one of the 2,000 survivors of the terrorist attack of March the 11th, 2004. That morning she was boarding a train at El Pozo station on her way to work when 2 bombs exploded. It was 7:37 a.m.
As soon as they got us out of the train, they laid us down just here. I saw dead people, injured people. We were all laid down here in a long line.
20 years after the bombings, Rosa Maria is still battling with the help of her husband to overcome the trauma.
Gracias. Hello, how are you?
Fine, how are you feeling?
Not great. I was walking along the street and I smelt smoke, as if a car was burning. The smoke filled the air. It smelled horrible. It turned my stomach.
Rosa was also left with permanent physical scars.
I'm going to change the battery. It's so small, I sometimes struggle to put it in.
She's 67 and has lost 90% of her hearing.
I got on the train and there was a bomb in my carriage. And that's where I was injured. And I'm now deaf.
The explosions affected Rosa Maria more than she first realised. Just a few months ago, during a medical checkup, doctors found shards of the bomb in her leg.
I've no idea to what extent these shards are still dangerous. I want to get over this, to remain positive. But it just goes on and on. One moment I feel good, I think I'm making progress, and then I go backwards again.
Hello, how are you?
To help her cope, Maria joined a victims' association.
I'm going to open the office, and we're going to begin the meeting as planned.
There are nearly 2,000 members of the association. 2 decades after the Madrid bombings, they say they're still fighting for their rights as victims.
I want to speak to you about something. The Interior Ministry has asked me for a medical report to prove I lost my hearing. Even though the justice system has already recognized me as deaf.
The authorities keep asking us for new documents, as if they didn't trust us.
Monse lost her sister in Atocha. She's one of the founding members of the association.
They're trying to make us give up. They're turning their backs on us.
67 people died at El Pozo train station. 126 other people were killed at the Santa Eugenia and Atocha stations and Tellez Street. Simultaneous explosions in 4 areas of the city put the emergency services under maximum pressure. These images show overwhelmed emergency workers trying as best as they could to help victims. In this footage, one man lays on a piece of sheet metal, a makeshift stretcher. Horrific scenes that Vigio Corral will never forget. In just 24 hours, Vigio and 2 fellow doctors had to tell the families of 140 people their relatives were dead.
We embalmed the bodies to preserve them in the best possible state. Once their families had identified them, they could take them for the funeral. We never allowed the families to go back to the waiting room. They left through another door so that they didn't tell other people what they'd seen. Our job teaches us to manage 1 or 2 deaths. Sadly, we weren't prepared for that, not on that scale.
Vigio swore to himself afterwards that health workers would be better prepared for any future terrorist attack.
Today we're going to try and set up the emergency tent in 8 minutes. One of the key points is to be able to really quickly set up this emergency post that we call the injury nest. It allows 1 or 2 doctors to be with several patients at the same time. They would be spread around us and we'd be able to see them at all times.
Juan Antonio was also on duty that day. The first few moments after an attack are crucial to saving lives.
We train regularly and we attend special events like marathons and demonstrations where we set up special structures. That helps us be ready for a disaster, to be more reactive.
Since March the 11th, the police, the fire brigade and the security forces have learned to work better together. They train with big annual drills like this one. The emergency team's resources have doubled in the last 20 years.
Today we can send emergency vehicles to 4 different places at the same time. And we have 2 vehicles permanently patrolling the streets 24 hours a day, every day of the year.
The Madrid attacks took place 3 days before a general election. The Conservative People's Party, which backed the war in Iraq against public opinion, feared the worst. Despite the evidence pointing to a jihadist attack, the government continued to accuse the Basque terrorist organisation ETA.
There's no doubt for Spaniards that the #1 suspect is the terrorist group that has carried out attacks for the last 30 years in our country and that is responsible for 900 deaths.
Hello, everyone. Today we're going to speak about the March 11th attacks.
The government's communication over the attack, which probably cost the right the election, is now a textbook case of how not to handle a crisis, as Octavio Rojas students discuss.
Aznar, the Prime Minister, called the main media and insisted that ETA was responsible for the attacks. Imagine George Bush or Blair or Putin or another leader calling the New York Times or the Financial Times. It was completely abnormal.
We need to learn about this case because if we don't want to commit the same errors in the future, we need to know how to react.
The then government's lack of transparency angered Spaniards. 11 million people took to the streets.
An attack on that scale unites a society. What led to division was the feeling that information was being hidden.
The false information given out by the PP government had negative consequences. Conspiracy theories circulated for 3 years before the trial opened. Javier Gomez was the presiding judge.
The courtroom ran from this stairwell to the end of the building. Down there was the victim's room. They were accompanied by psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and doctors with them. And at the end, there was a large room for 150 people to watch the trial with giant screens, because we couldn't let everyone in.
In February 2007, for the first time in Spain, the trial was broadcast in real time to the world's media.
It's the turn of the defense. We wanted to have a glass courtroom, totally transparent, so that the whole world could see in real time what we were doing. And all the documents that were shown during the trial, and that weren't in the court summary, were projected onto 17 screens, the size of this painting.
One of the exhibits was an Arabic statement by Al-Qaeda claiming responsibility for the attack. Investigators also found the van used by several terrorists and a bag with the bomb detonators. In a Basque newspaper, ETA issued a categorical denial of responsibility for the bombing. After a 4.5-month trial, the court concluded the bombings were committed by Al-Qaeda-inspired militants. 13 of the suspects were convicted and jailed for 12 to 23 years for belonging to a jihadist group. Since then, Spain's justice system has adapted to this new form of terrorism.
Before, investigators couldn't bug homes, because beforehand, to go into a home, we had to inform the tenant in writing. What was the point of using a microphone if you had informed someone of the visit? We adapted to the times to prevent attacks. That was our goal.
Since the attacks, every November, Eulogio, the president of the Victims Association, organizes a meeting with a panel of psychologists.
Come in. Make yourselves at home. Hello, and thank you all for coming.
20 years after the Madrid bombs, it's still a challenge for the victims to lead a normal life.
Family puts pressure on you and says you keep going on about it and it's time to move on. That it happened 20 years ago and you shouldn't think about it every day. I don't think about it every day, but I do mention it. And they tell me to stop.
I'm sorry. It's something that troubles me. I've had the same experience, and I continue to go through it. We're not playing at being victims. I don't speak about it to anyone. But for goodness sake, it's my pain, and the pain of other families.
We can't get it out of our minds. It happened to us.
Eulogio's pain is summed up by one name, that of his son Daniel, who died 20 years ago. In the Retiro Park in Madrid, every cypress tree planted represents a victim of the bombs.
This is the most recent photo of him before the attacks. He was such a happy person. He had lots of friends. Friends from school, even from when he was a child.
In memory of his son and other victims, Eulogio is fighting for a new plaque to be erected.
It's important to remember that the attacks on the 11th of March 2004 were committed by a jihadist cell. And not because I say so, but because there was a court judgment. There's proof of that. Those attacks were done by a jihadist cell.
"20 years after that dark day, Spain is still learning lessons from how it was handled. The jihadist attack remains the most deadly ever committed on Spanish soil.
Celine Schmidt, Armel Exposito with Sarah Morris revisiting the Madrid train bombings for France 24. Well, that's all for this week's edition. Of course, you can catch it and all the previous editions as well on our website at france24.com. More news coming up very shortly. Thanks for watching.